National Assembly has passed the budget, raising it from 7.298 trillion naira, earlier proposed by President Buhari, to 7.441 trillion naira. I'm Linda Akibe, and you're welcome to the Gavel. The National Assembly passed the budget 5 months into the year, so the country is still stuck in a cycle where the 2017 budget would most likely go on into next year, except something drastic happens. As expected, the National Assembly made some adjustments to the budget proposal from the executive.
It took 5 months for the National Assembly to conclude work on the 2017 budget. The journey to the passage of the 2017 budget was not as bumpy as the previous year, where allegations of budget padding, abuse of office in the budgeting process, and even budget fraud were thrown left, right, and center. But that did not mean that the process of passing the 2017 budget was devoid of drama. 2 weeks ago, the Senate Appropriations Committee, Senator Danjuma Goje, had alleged that the police seized some documents relating to the 2017 budget during a raid on his apartment in Abuja, an allegation the police flatly denied. Nevertheless, the National Assembly eventually passed the budget of 7.441 trillion naira, 5 months after President Buhari delivered the budget to a joint session of Parliament on December 14, 2016. The figure passed saw an increase of 143 billion naira, up from the proposed 7.298 trillion naira. Recurrent expenditure is set at 2.987 trillion, capital expenditure 2.177 trillion, debt service 1.841 trillion, fiscal deficit 2.356 trillion. Meanwhile, benchmark price of crude is set at $44.50, crude oil production at 2.2 million barrels per day, and an exchange rate of 305 naira to the dollar. Highlights of some key appropriation in the 2017 budget are Defense, 330.5 billion naira recurrent, 139.2 billion naira capital. Ministry of Education, 398.6 billion naira recurrent, 56.7 billion naira capital. Ministry of Agriculture, 31.7 billion naira recurrent, 103.7 billion naira capital. Ministry of Health, 252.8 billion naira recurrent, 55.6 billion naira capital. Ministry of Power, Works and Housing, 32.8 billion naira recurrent, and 553.7 billion naira for capital. Presenting the 2017 budget to lawmakers in the Senate, the chairman of the Appropriation Committee says the National Assembly included some interventions in the budget which were not originally in the proposal.
The committee also made some landmark interventions in some critical sectors of our national life. These include the provision for the second Abuja runway, the funding for the resumption of work on the long-abandoned Wari-Alaja rail line, rehabilitation and upgrading of the Abeokuta airport. We have also made adequate provision for the completion and takeoff of the Baro Inland Port under the Nigerian Inland Waterways Authority.
Briefing journalists after the passage of the budget, Senator Danjuma Goje and the Senate spokesperson explained why the Senate jacked up the budget.
In processing this year's budget, the National Assembly introduced certain projects or funded certain projects that were not initially funded or properly funded by the executive. But in some cases, we also added on what the executive brought. For example, the National Assembly introduced funding for the takeoff of the construction of second Abuja runway, which was not in the initial submission of Mr. President. We allocated money for the takeoff of the project, not to finance the whole project, but at least the project will start, and we are just leading the way for the federal government to implement. Nigerians keep on wondering that the National Assembly is delaying the budget process. This budget was submitted to us in December, and we're just passing it now in May. But don't forget that this budget was submitted to us, was presented to the National Assembly a day or two before we went on our recess in December. So we didn't touch it until we came back. So it's a process that takes long. And that's why in the Fiscal Responsibility Act, it is stated that the budget should be laid before the National Assembly at least 4 months before the expiration of the financial year. So if this budget presented to us by September, as required by law, obviously, by December ending, we finish processing the budget, and everything will be neat.
It is important we also say that the aspect of roads, 25 billion was added to roads. Very important. You know, he just told you some highlights. And I thought the issue of roads is very important. And all of us travel to one destination or the other, and we know the state of our roads. Now, the other aspect is core members' allowance, because this affects the youth. A situation where a core member is serving in a place he doesn't have anybody and his allowance is not coming as at when due, I think it's just an open ticket to go into shady activities. So it's something very serious, and I think this aspect also the committee and the National Assembly by implication, because what we have done here is a joint resolution, a joint conclusion. The other aspect is the issue of the Economic Recovery and Growth Plan, which the federal government just unveiled. We thought, yes, you've unveiled it. There are a lot of preparatory work that needs to be done. And to kickstart that process, funds were also allocated so that at the end of the day, we want to go back to robust national planning, arrangements where we'll have very robust plans that year in, year out we can be implementing. So I think this and some other and then with respect to public servants, civil servants, there were some deficits with respect to personnel cost, because in calculating the personnel cost, some of the MDAs had shortages. And I think you agree with us that during the budget defense process, many ministries or agencies had complained about deficit. I think this aspect also was properly captured.
In the House of Representatives, it was almost smooth sailing for the passage of the 2017 budget, except at the point where lawmakers were about to pass the budget for the office of the Secretary to the Government of the Federation.
Secretary to the Government of the Federation, SGF, 51,933,366,906 naira. Carried. Carried. Honorable colleagues, you know that just like the National Assembly is an institution, the office of the SGF too is an institution comprising so many agencies. So this one is not just for SGF as one office. Carried. Well, it has already been carried. If you disagree, you come by way of a substantive motion.
Despite the passage of the 2017 budget, many analysts fault the consistent practice of the executive and the National Assembly, who passed the budget almost halfway into the year. The late passage of the 2017 budget is almost guaranteed to continue the cycle of poor capital budget implementation by the executive. The National Assembly, however, believes the executive is to blame for the late submission of the appropriation bill. The late passage is now a recurring problem which both arms of government have not been able to resolve to get the country back to a one-year budget cycle. Another thorny issue is that of budget implementation and poor releases for capital implementation, which does the country no good.